She stood in the foyer of their 12,000-square-foot mansion, swirling a glass of wine that cost more than my first truck. With a smirk that sent ice through my veins, Chloe looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't expect a penny of your son's $50 million, Thomas. I never cared much for money. When you spend 30 years as a heavy machinery mechanic at the Joliet rail yards, you learn quickly that wealth is just a fairy tale happening to people in another zip code." My currency was calloused hands, a sore back, and the quiet pride of providing for my family. My wife, Sarah, used to say, we were rich in the things that don't rust. She was the light of my life, a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that could thaw a Chicago winter. When we lost her to ovarian cancer in 2004, that light went out. I was left alone in our modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Oak Park, a 40-year-old widower with a 10-year-old son who suddenly looked at the world with terrified, grieving eyes. That boy was Leo. After Sarah passed, I threw everything I had into raising him. I worked double shifts, coming home smelling of diesel grease and industrial solvent, scrubbing my hands with pumice soap until they were raw, just so I wouldn't leave stains on his homework when I helped him with it. But Leo didn't need much help. By the time he was 13, it was clear his brain worked differently. He didn't see the world in nuts and bolts like I did. He saw it in code, in algorithms, in the invisible architecture of the digital world. I didn't understand computers. To me, they were glorified typewriters that broke too often. But when Leo asked for a custom-built processing unit for his 16th birthday, I didn't hesitate. I drained a portion of my meager retirement fund and handed him $3,000. He built a machine that hummed in our basement like a jet engine. I used to sit on the stairs at 2 in the morning, listening to the furious, rhythmic clicking of his keyboard, smiling to myself. He was building his future. When Leo was 17, he wrote a piece of software designed to encrypt data streams. He called it the Aegis Protocol. He was so young, he couldn't even legally sign the paperwork to protect it. So I hired a local attorney, Arthur Pendleton. I paid Arthur $1,500 to file the patent under my name, with the understanding that it was Leo's invention. "Just holding on to it for you until you're a man, kiddo," I told him when the official U.S. Patent Office envelope arrived. We pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen. Fast forward a decade, and that little basement project had morphed into Aegis Security Solutions, a cybersecurity firm based out of Austin, Texas. Leo was the founder and CEO. I was so incredibly proud of him I thought my chest would burst. He was 27, brilliant, and on the verge of changing the industry. But then he met Chloe. They met at a charity gala in Dallas. Chloe was an art broker, or at least that's what she called herself. She came from a family of East Coast socialites who had lost their fortune in the 2008 crash but desperately clung to the illusion of it. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with sharp, aristocratic features and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I knew from the moment I met her that she looked at me not as Leo's father, but as a blemish on their perfect aesthetic. When they got married in a lavish 500-person ceremony in Napa Valley, I felt like a ghost haunting my own son's life. I wore a rented tuxedo that didn't fit right. Chloe's parents, Richard and Evelyn, treated me like the hired help, offering tight, patronizing smiles before steering high-profile guests away from the charming blue-collar father. Leo was blind to it. He was so in love, so swept up in the high society world Chloe had introduced him to, that he didn't notice how she was systematically building a wall between us. First, it was the Sunday phone calls. They used to be an hour long. Soon, they were 10 minutes, squeezed in between Chloe's brunch dates and couples therapy sessions. Then, it was the holidays. "Thomas, we'd love to fly you out for Christmas," she would purr over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "But we're hosting the board of directors, and it's going to be so dreadfully boring and corporate. You'd hate it." I let it slide. I wanted my son to be happy. Then came the buyout. A massive tech conglomerate in Silicon Valley purchased Aegis Security Solutions for a staggering $50 million. Overnight, my son went from a successful entrepreneur to a centimillionaire. The news was everywhere. Leo called me, his voice shaking with excitement, crying as he said, "Dad, we did it. Everything you sacrificed. It paid off." He promised to fly me down to Texas the following week to celebrate. He talked about buying me a new house, retiring me early, buying me a classic, restored Mustang. I told him I didn't need any of that, I just wanted to see him. But the flight was never booked. When I called, Chloe answered. Leo was always in a meeting, or dealing with lawyers, or exhausted. Months turned into a year. The silence grew heavier, thicker, until I realized, with a sinking heart, that I had lost my son entirely to the gates of his new fortune. I never would have reached out for money. I have my pride. Even when the roof of the Oak Park house started leaking, I patched it myself. Even when my ancient truck finally gave up the ghost, I took the bus. But life doesn't care about a man's pride. 2 years after the buyout, I started experiencing severe chest pains and shortness of breath. A visit to the cardiologist brought terrifying news. I had a severe case of aortic valve stenosis. The valve was failing rapidly. Due to my age and some underlying health factors, standard open-heart surgery was deemed too risky. The doctors recommended an advanced, minimally invasive procedure called TAVR. There was just one problem. My union insurance, which had been steadily gutted over the last decade, deemed the specific advanced procedure and the out-of-network specialist required as experimental and elective. They denied the claim. The out-of-pocket cost was going to be $120,000. Without it, the doctor gave me 6 to 8 months. I liquidated my savings. I took out a second mortgage on the house. I scrounged together $40,000, but I was still $80,000 short. For the first time in my 62 years of life, I was utterly, completely helpless. I had no choice. I had to ask Leo. $80,000 was a drop in the bucket for a man worth $50 million. I felt a deep, burning shame having to ask, but I wanted to live. I wanted to be around long enough to, maybe, one day, meet my future grandchildren. I couldn't get him on the phone, so I decided to make the trip. I bought a cheap economy ticket to Austin and took an Uber to the address I had written down from one of his rare text messages. When the car pulled up to the estate in the exclusive Westlake Hills neighborhood, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Wrought iron gates, a sweeping driveway paved with imported cobblestone, and a sprawling modern monstrosity of glass, black steel, and white limestone. It looked like a modern art museum, cold and uninviting. I pressed the intercom button at the gate. A security guard answered, and after 5 agonizing minutes of verifying my identity, the gates slowly swung open. When I reached the front door, it wasn't Leo who opened it. It was Chloe. She was dressed in a silk lounge set, holding a long-stemmed wine glass. She looked at me, not with surprise, but with profound annoyance. "Thomas," she said, not moving to let me in. "What an unexpected surprise. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Hi, Chloe," I said, taking off my worn baseball cap and crushing it in my hands. "Is Leo home? I really need to speak with him." Leo is in Tokyo for the week, finalizing the integration of the European servers," she replied smoothly, taking a slow sip of her wine. "He's incredibly busy. As you can imagine, a $50 million transition takes up quite a bit of bandwidth." "I understand," I said, feeling the exhaustion of the journey settling into my bones. "Can I come in? I'd like to leave him a message, or maybe use your phone to call him if he has a moment." It's a medical emergency, Chloe." "It's my heart." She finally stepped aside, leading me into a foyer that echoed with emptiness. Abstract art hung on the walls, and the furniture looked too expensive to actually sit on. She didn't offer me a seat. A medical emergency, she repeated, her tone flat. She leaned against a marble console table, studying me like a bug under glass. Let me guess. The union insurance isn't covering something, and you need a loan. I felt my face flush. It's not a loan to buy a boat, Chloe. My aortic valve is failing. I need a specialized surgery, and I'm $80,000 short. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't desperate. Chloe sighed, setting her wine glass down with a sharp clink. She crossed her arms, her posture perfectly rigid. Thomas, let's be entirely frank with one another, she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous register. Leo and I have spent the last 2 years building a specific life, a specific brand. We are in the upper echelon of tech society now, and frankly, your constant looming presence, this working-class guilt trip you try to lay on him, is exhausting. Guilt trip? I stammered, stepping back. He's my son. I wiped his tears when his mother died. I bought him his first computer. I just want to live. He doesn't owe you his success, Chloe snapped, her eyes flashing. He built Aegis. You just happened to be in the same house. And now you're showing up at my door, uninvited, asking for a handout? Do you know how many people try to bleed Leo dry? Charities, old friends, distant relatives. You're just another hand reaching into his pocket. I am his father. I raised my voice, my chest tightening with actual physical pain. Chloe stepped forward, completely unfazed by my anger. She lowered her face toward mine, a cruel, triumphant smirk pulling at the corners of her mouth. Listen to me very carefully, Thomas, she whispered. I manage the finances. I manage the trusts. Leo does what I advise him to do because I understand this world, and you do not. You are a mechanic from Chicago. You do not belong here. So, go back to your little house, figure out your own medical bills, and don't expect a penny of your son's $50 million, ever. She opened the massive front door. The dismissal was absolute. I stood there for a long moment. I could have fought her. I could have screamed, but the sheer coldness of her words broke something inside me. I realized in that moment that she had already poisoned the well. If I called Leo now, she would spin it. She would say I threatened her, that I demanded money, that I was trying to extort them. I turned and walked out the door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet, manicured neighborhood. I flew back to Chicago in a daze. I sat in my empty house for 2 days, staring at the wall, feeling my heart literally and figuratively failing me. I was preparing to die. I started going through my old paperwork, organizing my meager estate, so Leo wouldn't have a mess to clean up when I was gone. I climbed the pull-down stairs into the dusty attic to retrieve an old green metal lockbox where I kept Sarah's death certificate and the deed to the house. I carried it down to the kitchen table and snapped the lock open. As I sifted through the yellowing papers, my fingers brushed against a thick, heavy envelope with a federal seal. I pulled it out. The date stamped on the front was the 14th of October 2013. It was the original patent documentation filed by Arthur Pendleton, the patent for the Aegis Protocol, core algorithmic architecture. I stared at the document, my breath catching in my throat. Because Leo was a minor at the time, the patent wasn't filed jointly. It was filed solely, exclusively, and irrevocably in the name of Thomas Bennett. Aegis Security Solutions, the company Leo just sold for $50 million. I pulled out my reading glasses and squinted at the dense legal text. I recalled a brief conversation I had with Leo years ago, right when he incorporated his business in Texas. He had asked me to sign a transfer of intellectual property. I had meant to. I really had. But the paperwork got lost in the mail. Then I got busy with double shifts, and Leo got busy courting investors. We completely forgot about it. The tech conglomerate hadn't just bought Leo's brand or his client list. They bought the proprietary software. But legally, Leo didn't own the software. I did. The $50 million acquisition was built on a foundation of intellectual property that belonged entirely to me. If the acquiring conglomerate found out that the core patent was never properly transferred, the entire $50 million deal would be null and void. They could sue Leo for fraud. They could claw back every single cent. Chloe had told me not to expect a penny of my son's $50 million. As I looked at the legal document bearing my signature, a cold, unfamiliar resolve settled over me. She was right. It wasn't his $50 million at all. It was mine. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Arthur Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton's office hadn't changed in 15 years. It still smelled of stale coffee and old paper, with the same flickering, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. When I dropped the heavy, federal-sealed envelope onto his cluttered desk, he looked up at me over his half-moon spectacles, bewildered. "Thomas, it's been a decade," Arthur said, his raspy voice laced with surprise. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't waste time on pleasantries." "Open it, Arthur. Tell me what I'm looking at." He pulled the documents from the envelope. As his eyes scanned the yellowing paper, his bushy eyebrows slowly rose toward his receding hairline. He flipped to the second page, then the third, tracing the signatures with a trembling index finger. "This is the original patent for the Aegis protocol," Arthur whispered, looking up at me. "The core architecture. Thomas, your son just sold a company based entirely on this algorithm to Horizon Global Technologies for $50 million. "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "My question is, Arthur, who owns it?" Arthur leaned back in his creaky leather chair, exhaling a long breath. "You do, solely and irrevocably. Since Leo was a minor, and because we never executed a formal transfer of intellectual property to his LLC, you hold 100% of the rights to the underlying code. Thomas, they sold a house they didn't hold the deed to. What happens when Horizon Global finds out?" "If they find out," Arthur said, leaning forward, "the entire acquisition is invalid. It's a breach of the representations and warranties clause. Horizon Global's legal team would immediately freeze the $50 million. They could sue Leo for IP fraud and demand punitive damages. It would be a bloodbath." I felt a pang of guilt. I loved my son. I didn't want to destroy him, but I remembered Chloe's cold, lifeless eyes. "Don't expect a penny of your son's $50 million, ever." She wasn't just hoarding wealth. She was isolating Leo, managing his life, and driving a wedge between us so deep it was literally going to cost me my life. "Arthur," I said, placing my calloused hands on his desk, "I need you to draft a formal notice of ownership. But we don't send it to Leo. We send it directly to Richard Hughes, the lead general counsel for Horizon Global." Arthur swallowed hard. "Thomas, this is going to detonate your son's world. His world is already a prison, Arthur. He just doesn't know it yet. And I need $80,000 to fix my heart before I die. Do it." 2 days later, the bomb went off. I was sitting in my living room, staring blankly at the muted television, when my phone started ringing. It wasn't Leo. The caller ID flashed a Dallas area code. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Then again. Finally, I answered. "Thomas?" It was Chloe. Gone was the aristocratic purr, replaced by a shrill, vibrating panic. "Hello, Chloe," I said, calmly. "What did you do?" she screamed, the facade completely shattering. "Horizon Global just froze our accounts. The bank locked us out of the trust. Their lawyers are talking about criminal fraud charges, Thomas. Are you insane? You're destroying your own son." "I haven't destroyed anything," I replied, my voice as cold as the marble in her foyer. "I merely notified the buyers that they purchased stolen property that belongs to a mechanic from Chicago." "Thomas, please." Her tone suddenly shifted, frantically grasping for a bargaining chip. "Let's be reasonable. You said you needed money for a surgery? 80,000, right? I can write you a check right now. I'll make it 200,000, a million. Just sign the transfer papers and call off your lawyer. You don't understand, Chloe, I said softly. It was never about the money. It was about my son. You told me I didn't belong in your world. It turns out, your entire world belongs to me. I hung up the phone. The following evening, the headlights of a rented sedan washed across my living room window. I heard the frantic slamming of a car door, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. The front door swung open. It was Leo. He looked terrible. He had aged 5 years in the last 48 hours. His designer suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of terror and betrayal. "Dad," he breathed out, stepping into the dim light of the hallway. Why would you do this to me? The conglomerate is threatening to seize the house. Look, they're talking about prison time for misrepresenting the IP. Everything I built. It's gone. I stood up splinterous, aching, and walked over to my son. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with all the sorrow a father could carry. "Sit down, Leo." He collapsed onto the old floral sofa, burying his face in his hands. Chloe is in hysterics. She's talking about filing for divorce to protect her family's assets. She says, "You're extorting us." "Leo, look at me," I said gently. He lifted his bloodshot eyes. "Last week, I came to your house," I said. "Did Chloe tell you that?" Leo frowned, shaking his head slowly. "No. She said you called and demanded a handout, and that she politely told you I was unavailable. I flew to Austin, Leo. I stood on your porch. I pulled the medical file from the coffee table and handed it to him. My aortic valve is failing. Doctor, William Aris in Chicago told me I have 6 to 8 months without a specialized surgery that my insurance won't cover. I needed $80,000. I swallowed my pride, flew to your home, and begged your wife for help." Leo stared at the medical documents, his hands beginning to tremble. "She turned me away, Leo," I continued, my voice cracking. "She told me I was a blue-collar guilt trip. She told me I didn't belong in your new life, and she explicitly warned me never to expect a single penny of your 50 million. She left me to die." The color completely drained from Leo's face. He read the diagnosis, saw the denied insurance claims, and then looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. The brilliant tech CEO faded away, and for a second, I saw the grieving 10-year-old boy I had raised. She never told me," Leo whispered, his voice breaking. "Dad, I swear to God, she never told me. If I had known." "I know you didn't," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "But you let her build a wall between us. You let the money and the lifestyle blind you to who she really was. I didn't trigger this legal nightmare to ruin you, Leo. I did it to save you. Because the moment the money stopped flowing, I knew she would show her true colors." "She said she was leaving," Leo choked out, a sob finally escaping his chest. "The minute the accounts were frozen, she packed a bag and went to her parents. She didn't even care about the company. She just cared about the money. And now you know," I said. We sat in silence for a long time. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound. "So, what happens now?" Leo asked, wiping his face. "Do you keep the 50 million? I smiled, a tired, genuine smile. "I'm a mechanic, Leo. What on earth would I do with $50 million? I'd probably just buy a really nice set of socket wrenches." I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a fresh manila folder Arthur Pendleton had prepared that morning. I handed it to my son. "These are the IP transfer documents, completely backdated and legally ironclad," I explained. "I've already spoken with Richard Hughes at Horizon Global." I explained it was a clerical error between a father and son. They are satisfied, and they are lifting the freeze on the funds tomorrow morning. Leo stared at the folder, utterly stunned. "But," I added, raising a finger, Arthur structured the release with a few conditions. First, the $50 million goes into a newly formed, irrevocable trust. You are the sole beneficiary. Chloe will not have access to a single dime of it, and if she follows through with the divorce, she gets absolutely nothing. Second, the trust will immediately disperse $80,000 to Chicago Memorial Hospital to pay for my surgery. Leo stood up, the papers falling to the floor, and wrapped his arms around me. He held me tighter than he had in 10 years, crying into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he wept. "I lost my way. I am so sorry." "I know, son," I whispered, patting his back. "I know." 2 weeks later, I underwent the TAVR procedure. It was a complete success. When I woke up in the recovery room, groggy and sore, Leo was sitting right beside my bed, holding my hand. Chloe did file for divorce, completely unaware of the new trust structure until her lawyers hit a titanium wall. She walked away from the marriage with nothing but her silk lounge sets and her wounded pride. Leo moved back to Chicago. He didn't buy a massive mansion. He bought a comfortable house a few miles from my place. We spend our Sundays together now, working on restoring a 1968 Mustang in my garage. My hands are still calloused, and my back still aches, but my heart works just fine. What an unbelievable journey. From a heartbreaking betrayal to the ultimate lesson in loyalty and love, Thomas proved that a father's protective instinct never fades. Would you have forgiven Leo, or would you have kept the $50 million for yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this dramatic twist of fate, make sure to smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories.